Folks, good evening. My name is Brad Rawson. I'm a Somerville resident, and I work in Mayor Curtatoni's Community Development Office. Thanks so much for coming tonight. We are friends, we are neighbors. It is wonderful to me to see so many familiar faces in this audience, but it's also really wonderful to see many of you who I've never met before. One of the great things over the course of the 7 years that I've been in public service in this great city is seeing a nice mix of folks who have been at it, advocating for a better future for all of us for much longer than I have. But then at the same time, we are bringing new people into this process. We are plugging our residents and stakeholders in who have never participated in civic affairs. And isn't that consistent with Somerville's identity? Isn't that how all of the great things happening in this community have been built? So I will be serving as your MC this evening. And again, I'm really delighted to be playing this role as part of the mayor's team. I don't need to tell you that we're at a special and challenging moment in Somerville's history. The work that we've done, the advocacy that we have collaborated on for more than 40 years is yielding fruit. The Green Line is under construction. The Orange Line Assembly Square has opened. Somerville Public Schools have recently been voted as the best performing district in Massachusetts, the best performing urban school district in Massachusetts. And so it's a moment of tremendous triumph for all of the decades of hard work that we as community members have put in. But at the same time, we recognize that many communities like Somerville have often at these critical moments started to lose the things that make them who they are. Mayor Curtatoni has been very, very clear. We will not lose our soul at this moment of our triumph. We will make sure that we preserve what is great about Somerville at the same time as we invite new investment and make sure that the next generation of Somerville residents have the same access to opportunity and quality of life that our forebears and that we do today. So again, I'm proud as a resident and as a public servant to be here with you and to tell you that Somerville's zoning ordinance is making a transformative leap into the 21st century. Our community has reformed the way that local government runs since 1970, and some folks in the room will remember those days when municipal finance, tax assessing, community policing, public education reform, the seeds of all of these transformative reform efforts were sown. And we have, again, seen how a good, transparent, customer service-oriented local government can work. And now we are the model. Somerville is no longer looking to other communities to figure out what to do. Other communities around the Commonwealth and around the country are looking to Somerville. So it's a moment of tremendous pride for us. What are the goals of our code reform? Clearly, they are the same as they were in 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000. We want to do a better job of protecting and preserving the quality of life and the quality of the residential neighborhoods that most of you will live on. Traditional blocks of two and three family homes like the one I live on in West Somerville. And at the same time, we want to preserve the social diversity and dynamism of our community, the small businesses that make Somerville what it is, our arts and fabrication and maker economies that have really helped Somerville weather the storm of the economic recession in 2008, 2009, 2010. We will make sure that we have the resources to continue investing in good, transparent, customer service-oriented government, policing, infrastructure improvements, quality of cultural programming. And how is all of this tied together in a strategic plan? Again, I see many familiar faces in the audience who worked with us on the grassroots-generated Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan. Comprehensive plans are much like business plans for small businesses or operating plans for nonprofit organizations. If you were a bank lender, you wouldn't necessarily feel great about making a loan if you didn't see a business plan. When municipal governments do the same thing, figuring out what the priorities of today are and how they can act tomorrow to make sure that they are growing opportunities in an equitable and transparent way. Comprehensive plan is the term that we use and is an industry standard. Summer Vision is well regarded as a great example of this. And it always starts with a discussion of values, right? So the words that you see on this screen are the words that came up most frequently in the 3-year public process around Summer Vision. 2009, 2010, 2011, our residents came together in rooms like this one and talked about the things that they hold most dear about Somerville and about the things that they know needed to change as we go forward and position ourselves for the next couple of generations. So these are the things that we will preserve and protect and also grow going forward. And again, this is so consistent with the advocacy work that has happened in this community over the course of decades. Mayor Curtatone often asks our residents to roll up their sleeves, to get involved and to do the work, get out of the audience and onto the stage to help. So to that end, let me recognize a few public servants here in the room with us tonight. We're very pleased to have many members of our Board of Aldermen. Alderman from Ward 2, Mary Ann Houston, is here with us. Alderman from Ward 3, Bobby McWaters, is here with us. Alderman from Ward 7, my ward, Mary Jo Rossetti, is here for us. Alderman at Large, Mary Jo Rossetti, is here with us. President of the Board of Aldermen, Bill White, is here with us. Ward 5, Alderman Mark Niedergang is here with us. Alderman at Large, Jack Connolly, is here with us. So if you're an elected official and I have missed you, please raise your hand. Okay. Again, thanks. These processes work best when professional staff, resident volunteers, and our elected and appointed officials are all working and pushing in the same direction. So we do, again, appreciate everybody's time. The format of tonight's meeting will comprise two components. There will be a lecture component. George Proakis, the city's planning director, will lead us through the actual technical details and philosophy of this zoning reform effort. And then we will pivot into some topical discussions. Zoning is a big umbrella, and there are so many issues that this code will address, whether you're most concerned about economic development and job opportunities, whether you're most concerned about housing opportunities and social equity, whether you're mostly concerned about preserving the great artists and fabrication economy that make Somerville what it is. This code includes many of the most progressive mechanisms to support and grow all of those things. And so what we're going to do is ask folks to self-select so that they can do deep dives and really dig into the details about any of those specific subject areas. We are at the beginning of an important and long process of community consultations. We've had dozens of community meetings already. We've been working on this zoning proposal for more than 2 years, but we've got a long way to go. And so I'm so encouraged to see so many folks here tonight at an important milestone. If you haven't been to our website yet, the entire code draft is on it, and we are now one of only 2 major metropolitan communities in the country that are using what's called an open comment app, so that any viewer of that ordinance draft can make comments right in the middle of the document that are visible by everybody else on the web who's browsing that document. We find that that's a much more transparent and user-friendly way to generate public comment rather than simply sending emails off to some city hall address and expecting that we're going to collate things and then return them back to you. We want to see our residents' words, and we want our residents to see their neighbors' words as they evaluate the merits of this zoning ordinance reform effort. So, again, what are the overall goals of this ordinance package? Protecting and preserving quality of life in our residential neighborhoods, growing housing opportunities for our diverse resident base and for folks who want to come and live here and be part of this great community. We know that we need more than 100 acres of new public open space. Somerville is one of the most deficient cities in terms of public open space access. And so the volunteers who worked on our summer vision process laid out these quantitative goals, and they challenged our staff. They said, are we willing as a community to set hard-edged targets? Many communities shy away from this type of work. Somerville did not. All of these numbers hang together on a map. And if you're wondering, as many folks must be, how does this ordinance affect my property, my neighbor's property, my block, my neighborhood? If you live on a traditional block of 2- and 3-family homes, small cottages, triple deckers, those neighborhoods are intended for better, clearer, more transparent protections than they've previously had. If you live on a bus route, one of our historic main streets or squares, we are looking for respectful, community-oriented reinvestment, the kind of mix of services and employment that our residents say they want, whether you're talking about something that is contextual to Davis Square or to Magoon Square or to parts of Union Square or East Broadway. And recognizing the opportunity of the 350 acres of transitioning industrial land on our east side that is now being unlocked by new public transit, by new infrastructure investments. We recognize that tens of thousands of new jobs can be added within Somerville's border, giving more of our residents a choice to live close to where they work. Think about the quality of life benefits that entails. Think about all the extra time in your day if you have the opportunity to work at Assembly Row compared to your current commute to, say, Longwood Medical Area. Our residents have recognized that growth and changing the dynamic that has kind of resulted in a bedroom community environment is really, really important. So this is a big picture framework map that our summer vision volunteers settled on. So again, just to reprise that, traditional neighborhood blocks, stronger, more clear and transparent protections that at the same time allow families to age in place and make respectful changes to their properties. Squares, using neighborhood planning, community processes to guide investment, industrial areas, phased smart growth opportunities that involve a mix of housing, open space, and transformative job creation. Our neighborhood planning process has been celebrated as a great model of participatory planning. Many of you will be familiar with the Somerville by Design sessions that we've been running in Davis Square, Gilman Square, East Somerville, and most recently in Winter Hill and Union Square. We've had a lot of fun and we've learned a lot and have produced strategic plans neighborhood by neighborhood. And more recently, we completed a 10-meeting series of summer zoning workshops, again, providing residents and advocates the opportunity to do deep dives into a diverse set of issues related to the new code. It gave us a tremendous amount of new information to work with, and we're really, really pleased with what's come out of the 10-meeting session last summer. So I'm really, really pleased now to introduce George Prowakis, the city's planning director, and he's a great public servant, and really, really excited to be part of the team. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brad. When we first looked at the idea of holding a public information session to introduce the zoning, I suggested to my staff maybe we should just go through it page by page. They luckily talked me out of that. It is my hope that I can use the opportunity today to give you a bit of an overview on how it interacts with and affects key constituencies, key priorities in the community, and then use the opportunity to break down to the tables to have more detailed discussions. And if folks want to dive into the what does this mean on page 22, I promise there'll be someone at one of these tables that can answer that type of question regardless of the page or the district. And what we'll do is if people want to at that point pull their chairs around one of the tables with one of us and talk about it. I'll be at the affordable housing table, but after all the affordable housing questions are done, I'll play, stump the planning director. You can ask me any question you want. I'm happy to see if I can handle it. I want to give a little background on kind of what has led us here and where our current code is today and where we started to go with this. I mean, our zoning ordinances in general became, started in the late 1800s, became very popular around the 1920s. A lot copied very similar sort of patterns of use districts and maps as ways of separating uses. Our code is of a similar era. It reached a point where there had been a series over time of not quite overhauls like this, but major reconstructions of sections of the code. The most recent and most significant of which we had here in Somerville was 1990. It was a very effective regulation for 1990. It used, I believe, the cutting-edge strategies of its era to address the concerns of zoning at that time. So with the set of tools that a planner had available to them and with the community we had in 1990, I think there was a valiant effort to try to address our concerns of those times. So I want to stress the code we have today, the one that we are moving away from, was cutting edge for 1990. So think for a second about what that means. A lot of things have changed in that time. Technology's changed. Our GIS technology, our ability to do mapping in the way we do has changed. Somerville has changed. Some of our priorities have changed. Some have stayed the same. But all of that is then based upon a zoning map, which, well, over time we've made changes, most recently 5 years ago in Union Square in East Somerville, but before that changes in creating the central business district zone and establishing ways different things would work. But the core lines on this map, the separation between the residence A and residence B, the locations of business districts versus residential districts, those have been on a zoning map in the city of Somerville since 1926. And we've done a lot of studies to try to figure out exactly what folks were thinking of in 1926 when they decided that one lot should be residence A versus one lot should be residence B. And I don't quite know the answer except to say I'm sure our map was a cutting-edge technology for 1926. And this has led us to the series of problems that we have today. and the challenges that led us to working with this. The first is that we have an unworkable code structure, and inevitably that happens over time as codes evolve, as you add new sections, as you add new chapters, as you try to address a new area or a new area of concern. You add a section on wireless communication, you add a section on floodplain regulations, and as each of these goes, inevitably certain cross-references become more difficult to understand. Things get stuck in one area or another area, and they don't quite fit together, and you're searching through the code trying to figure out what's where. And the second problem is that we've done a lot of physical design planning coming off of SummerVision for the transit station neighborhoods, and we're continuing to do that. But where we've completed that process and where we've gone far along in that process, areas like Gilman Square, the Lowell Street Station, areas like Interbelt and Brick Bottom, where we've done a series of planning to kind of move us to where we're going, that station zoning is not on the map and it needs to be fit into our new code. And the third is that we have no system of predictable outcomes. And this is part of the strategy of a cutting-edge 1990 code. So it's by design. It was based upon the idea that under the set of tools you had available at the time, if you couldn't guarantee or be determined to get a result out of anything, the easiest thing to do was to make wide swaths of things in the city non-conforming, which would cause just about anything, not everything, but a lot of things, to go into the zoning board or planning board for review. And you basically use nonconformity as a proxy to do design review and community input and process. And what ends up happening is there's no certainty of what you're doing. The setup, what you need to do to put a small dormer on your house and what you need to do to tear your house down and replace it with an 8-plex is exactly the same process. And you look at that and you go, well, that allows a lot of things to kind of merge and go the way it is, and maybe we can negotiate out solutions to one problem or another. But what it really creates is it creates this air of uncertainty and confusion about what may or may not be proposed at any point in time and how it may work. My staff spends hours explaining to developers and to neighbors what you can and cannot do in certain circumstances. And through that process, there's sort of this idea that what occurs in our office is some mysterious black box that no one quite understands, and all of these possibilities of what levers one can push or pull to make things happen. It all just becomes a big mystery, and that's not. It's not consistent with where we have become as a community and where we have gone. I mean, and the most challenging issue of it all is that everyone wants me to fix problem 2 and 3, and it's reached the point where I can't do another transit station district. I can't do another solution for predictability. I can't just delete one line to address people's concerns without addressing how it impacts another thing. I can't fix affordable housing if we can't fix predictability of development. So you can't fix problems 2 or 3 unless you fix problem 1. So a comprehensive solution is really what you need. And it's in the end of the day, it's a fundamental good government, good customer service solution to addressing how to deal with the community's challenges. So what we see it as is a part of a long-term strategy in this community, a 40-plus year strategy towards a reform movement of addressing how to provide good customer service and how to provide good government and how to make sure that we can provide an understanding of where we're going and how we're going, where there's a level and even an understood playing field for everybody. That's one of the reasons why through SummerVision, through the neighborhood planning process, and then through the public process here, we needed and continue to need the outreach and feedback to make sure we get it all right, because it's important to get those pieces of the code right, because this is going to pull together what our community vision is and determine where we're going and where and how we're looking at development decisions and community growth and community preservation decisions. But at the end of the day, we're focused on this because we really feel as if we are taking the next step in Somerville's reform movement. And for those that don't know all of the history, since the election of Lester Ralph in 1970, Somerville's been moving away from a system of sort of push and pull politics towards a more professional, reform-minded government, beginning with the Professional Assessing Office in the 1970s, continuing with accountability in finance and budgeting, the establishment of constituent service programs, and now we have the STAT program that does financial and statistical analysis of government programs. We have the 311 program where you single call to City Hall gets a trackable message about how to deal with your concerns for City Hall, the happiness surveys, the way we've worked to build better and better systems. We see the zoning overhaul as the next step in that series, the series to provide better customer service and open government. And essentially, that is a fundamental piece of the objective of what we're trying to do. Provide better customer service and open government, strengthen protections for our residential neighborhoods, cut red tape for small businesses as they try to work with our commercial squares, guide redevelopment in our industrial areas in a way that gets us what we need in our summer vision goals, and protect the arts economy and create new space for the maker community, the arts, small business, and startups in a way that can work for us. I want to stress the idea that one of our fundamental goals is simplicity and predictability. As I say that, I'm reminded of one of the comments the mayor made in his midterm speech yesterday, where he said that you cannot solve complicated problems with simple solutions. So we are simplicity to the level in which you can be simplicity in a zoning ordinance. It's not exactly, it's still a very complicated legal document, but it's organized where things are in the right place and they're easy to understand, and they're far more straightforward than sort of putting one district in section 6 and another district tucked over in section 16, and they kind of pull the ideas together. We started with the idea that an understandable map in districts. One of my fundamental rules of zoning is we should always name a zoning district something where you know what it's actually going to be when something gets built there. No more random acronyms that don't mean anything. Our core mixed-use districts that are our squares and our corridors are called 3-story mixed use, 4-story mixed use, 5-story mixed use, 7-story mixed use, and 10-story mixed use. I think it's pretty clear what you can expect you would potentially get in one of those districts if you're in one of those districts. Neighborhood residence is our district to protect the core neighborhood residences, residential areas. Urban residence is a district essentially of apartment building types. Fabrication, commercial industry, and civic. We'll talk a little more about kind of how bits and pieces of fabrication work. Commercial industry is a pretty standard industrial district where it's left, and civic is for civic buildings and parks. And then the special districts, Assembly Square, Tufts, and the floodplain district basically remain as they are and as they have been, as does North Point, which is a relatively new creation for the Somerville side of North Point. And I'll talk a little bit more about Innerbelt and Brick Bottom. All of these districts are then placed on a map. The map was built based upon a logic strategy that our staff worked together looking at the existing use of a parcel, the existing district that a parcel was in, the options of where and how that parcel might evolve in the future, and what the community's needs are under Summer Vision. We believe and we feel strongly that we've done a really good job of putting this map together, but I'm sure that there's the possibility that we have some things that could use some improvement, and I'm also sure that there are some folks who will say, well, I really think that either I should be in this district or that district, or the neighboring properties behind me should have been in this district or that district. Somewhere during the course of the night, come up to the mapping table and our staff can share more about how we're addressing the map, how we're organizing comments about the map, and how we're working to try to make it possible to have discussions in the public hearing process about the map. The second important piece about simplicity and predictability is reflecting Somerville's DNA. And what we mean by that is that we learned what actually makes Somerville Somerville. We spent a lot of time measuring and understanding the city, and by measuring, I literally mean measuring. In our neighborhood residence districts where we wanted contextual infill, we learned what makes a Somerville house, and what makes a Somerville neighborhood, and how those pieces all come together. In our commercial district, we spend a lot of time looking at what buildings work and what buildings don't work, and what elements of them make sense and what doesn't make sense. We spent the most of our time looking on a concern about the frontages, the way that a building interacts with the sidewalk, interacts with the street, and then interacts with the neighborhood around it, to make sure that if we are where we are encouraging things to change in new development, that we can create great neighborhoods out of these pieces of the Somerville DNA. And then we use the map and the DNA to build a easy to understand set of building type diagrams. The core concept of our code is based upon the idea that there are 17 building types in the ordinance. Different ones can be done in placed in different districts. A cottage or a house type or a triple-decker type fits in a neighborhood residence district. Mixed-use building type of certain heights fit in the certain height districts depending upon where they are. And there's different types of fabrication building, shop house, corner store. Each of these are designed to fit in certain places in the city. And everything is on a 2-page sheet that describes the height of these buildings, the setbacks of these buildings, the build-to lines where we want them to build, how we want the land with the street, and how all these pieces come together on a building type, so you could take a building type sheet and understand what you could do with that type. And then in addition to that, one of the most significant things we've done that I think is really unique to Somerville is we allow modest by right additions to existing buildings, even if the existing buildings are still fit into a non-conforming building category once the building types are created. So if your house is a little too short, or your lot line is a little too short, or something doesn't quite fit right, and you want to do a dormer, a front porch, a deck, a very small, modest rear addition, there are certain things within certain sizes that can be done without the route to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Right now, for example, if I want to add a dormer on my house and it's on the side where my driveway is, I could add a dormer. If I'm in the RA district, it can take half my roof line. If I'm in the RB district, it can take all of my roof line. If I'm on the shorter side, I need a special permit for that dormer, even though I can do the half in the RA and all of it in the RB. And by the time you look at all of this, the logic of where you can or cannot do one of these things versus what is actually important to the community is completely disconnected. What we do when people come into our office is there's a modest sized dormer that allows you to add a bathroom, add a bedroom, make families grow without really changing the core pieces of the house that's very much similar to the way other Somerville houses have. That becomes by right based upon the particular dimensions there. And the same thing with other components and pieces, from rear decks and patios to rear additions, front porches, and each of those pieces can come together to kind of make the kit of parts that makes the Somerville neighborhood work. Want to focus a bit on what we're doing for arts in the creative economy, because there's some significant pieces here. The mayor has been has spent quite a bit of time talking about the importance of creating the fabrication district and the ideal building types that help artists, makers, small businesses. This creates a district that allows the opportunity to bring things together the way that, for instance, the Artisans Asylum and Greentown Labs and Brooklyn Boulders come together in a complex, or at Vernon Street Studios, where you have Vernon Street Studios and Rogers Foam that kind of work together in a complex and kind of make it possible to create innovation hubs of artistic and creative activities in places that work. We've placed these on the maps in locations where these industries either are thriving or can be thriving, and feel that there's a big growth opportunity in Somerville for these sort of activities, and we look forward to being able to knowing that there are places that we can make that happen. The second thing is allowing art studios in homes and carriage houses, and being very particular and specific about that. The allowance for carriage houses is a particular change right now. Most people who have a carriage house in their backyard can't use it for much more than just parking a car and storing boxes. The idea that you can build a small art studio back there and even have people come browse through your artwork is a change in the code to allow more arts and creative activity in the community. And then the other thing we've done is within the residential districts, the building types are pretty typical, and then you have these sort of outlier institutional buildings or civic buildings that may change over time and determine what you want to do about them. We have made it very easy in the process to convert those buildings into arts and creative uses. I was desperately looking for an example of this and realized that although this one is in a more mixed district, it's the kind of thing we're talking about where if you're within a residence district, you can create an arts type use within that area. And then the last piece is within the larger districts, the 7-story and up districts, anything that's done that's new development requires 5% of gross floor area to be focused on arts and creative economy uses. So if you're building a building or a block or something of that size in those districts, it works to address those issues. The next category I want to talk about is affordable housing. This is a significant priority for the community. There's been a lot of talk recently about the concern that Somerville is a product of a regional housing market that has been very hot and having very significant impacts on prices and on stability of our community. The mayor tasked us and the Sustainable Neighborhoods Initiative group that's starting out to ensure that affordable housing becomes a priority and that we address affordable housing through zoning in a way that makes us a national leader. We have responded to that with a set of proposals here that fit in with the other sustainable housing activity going on in the community right now in the conversations around affordable housing with a couple of steps. The first, ensuring that projects of 7 or more units are required to have affordable housing. Right now that number's 8, so it moves that number to 7, and it requires you to get into the affordable inclusionary process. So that inclusionary zoning ordinance is something that's been in our books for years, and it's something that has worked very well for us within the numbers that are there. It's one of the things I particularly like about our existing ordinance because it's predictable, it's understandable, everyone follows the same set of rules. The development expectations are understood. You can plug the numbers into a development pro forma, and there aren't any particular surprises as to what those issues will be. Inclusionary housing requirements, which right now are either 1 in 8 or 15% in certain circumstances, are shifted to be either 1 in 8 units, 1 out of every 7, 1 out of every 6, or 1 out of every 5, depending upon 2 things. First of all, which district you're in, and second of all, how close to one of the existing transit stations you are. So you provide more housing in areas that are closer to transit because the need for affordable housing is greater there, the development opportunities are greater there, and the ability to live in a transit-centered opportunity there is more significant. So the transit-oriented map identifies the locations where that housing percentage shift occurs. It creates a middle income category. So currently there are 2 categories of affordable housing, and developers that are required to offer affordable housing in their projects have to alternate them between those 2 categories. This 3rd category is designed to catch people that are currently stuck between the qualifications for the subsidies for affordable housing and the affordable housing programs we have, including the purpose-built affordable housing that we have that folks like SCC do, as well as the affordable units that are in our neighborhood development projects, and the market itself. So there's folks who can't necessarily afford the market and can't get into the subsidy program, so this additional tier addresses that last area of concern. And the last thing that we have done regarding affordable housing that's important to point out is reducing parking relative to transit. Now, people sometimes say to me, well, why do you put parking as a housing issue? There are more and more studies establishing that the cost of parking, particularly the cost of over-parking sites, is adding to the cost of development, is adding to the cost of housing, is putting unnecessary burdens where I would rather have a developer subsidizing more affordable housing than subsidizing parking lots, and ensure that when we address our ability to get projects done and get parking done, that it matches what our actual needs are. So particularly the transit districts that require the additional affordable housing work on a parking maximum system, which is different than the parking requirements in the other neighborhoods. Although all of them are lower than the residential parking requirements today, and we can dive into that at one of the tables if we want. Somerville Economy, want to focus on what it does to help us meet our economic development goals. Most significantly, it creates a very simple set of use categories. Our existing code has over 290 different uses broken down by use and then by size and then by this and that, and this is special permit and this is by right, and there's all sorts of different things. So we have simplified this list to just under 100 items. I know a lot of folks would like me to go even lower, but I think this is the right set to step into this process with. So for example, a category like personal services that covers a lot of issues of different types of businesses that provide service to individuals, is allowed in the commercial district in a retail type storefront and allowed in an upper floor in a commercial district. But the types of things like a body art establishment, a funeral home, a healthcare provider, the ones that might be more important to us to have a review, we've set aside as a special permit. So we've established that the special permit, which for those who don't follow the details of zoning, the special permits are a discretionary review that goes before either the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Planning Board. So, and so if it's listed as allowed in the use table and you have an existing space, you could put that use into the space. If it's listed as special permit, you have to go before a board, public hearing, public comment, public process occurs around that. So we wanted to make sure that we establish just the right things for the special permit and establish the items by right that are reasonable to do. The second thing we've done is to make sure that where we do require a special permit, we're very specific as to why we're doing it and what we want the board to do. So the example I have above me here talks about the bar or tavern use, which is a special permit use. And what it's saying is when the zoning board gets a bar or tavern request for a special permit, we want them to focus on the two things we always focus on, which is consistency with the comp plan and consistency with the zoning ordinance, as well as the things that are listed, which is compatibility with the surrounding buildings, noise impacts, the location of designated or outdoor smoking areas if that occurs, and the location of trash and recycling storage and the procedures for pickup. So these are the things that we regularly hear from the community are the biggest areas of importance of these types of uses, and we want to say, when that use comes in for a special permit, we want to say to the zoning board, these are the things we want you to focus on. In areas where there's such predictable set of things that we see time and again, if a use comes in or if we're pretty used to understanding a particular activity and how it occurs, and we say, well, we know that when this activity occurs, these are the things that concern us. Rather than sending that specific activity into a special permit, the other thing that we can do and that we've done in certain spaces is establish a performance standard for that use. In that case, it's listed in the code as L for limited. So if you look at this one, for example, Creative Studio, which is the art space in your carriage house that you can do under limited circumstances in a residential district, is allowed by right, but limited, and there's rules about production of noise and when you can have people coming and going from the space. And if you can meet those requirements, you can do it. So that's the basics of being able to say we can do that because we know we have that performance standard strategy addressed. And then most significantly for economic development, I think this is an area of real importance, is guiding the transition in the areas that are going to change. And we started with the new code work for North Point that we did try to cobble onto the old code. And with the Interbelt and Brick Bottom special districts we're creating, we're expanding this concept. And it's a concept I also want to enter into the discussion in the Union Square process as we do the Union Square neighborhood plan to see if it is a viable solution to address there too. But the key to these ideas is that what we're saying in Interbelt or Brick Bottom is we're giving landowners a choice. You can continue the commercial industrial type activity that has been going on there today. And within a certain group of uses, you can continue to operate that, and you can build buildings of a certain size that does that, and that's just fine. But when you want to transform to do something to contribute towards creating the transit-oriented neighborhood in these places that we imagine is part of our future under Summer Vision, we're going to ask you to come in with a piece of land of a certain size, at least a few acres, and on that do what we're calling a large development plan review, where we're going to plan out the future of how that development area is going to work. Now, a lot of folks want to do residential development as part of these projects, and that's a key concern to address our housing needs, our regional housing needs, and our affordable housing needs. But what we are doing as a part of this process is saying that if you are coming in with a project that is going to do these larger heights, we expect 4 things back for the community out of that neighborhood plan process. We want to make sure that the project, while it can provide a percentage of residential development, provides extensive affordable housing, meets extensive affordable housing requirements, usually in the 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 regulation based upon whether they're close or further from the transit area. The second thing we're saying is that we want to make sure that residential development is a percentage of the total development and that there also be a commercial development component, a significant commercial development component as a part of the program. The third thing we're saying is that we want 5% of the floor area to be dedicated to the creative industry, artists, startup space, performance space, and those sort of activities. And the fourth thing we're expecting is the inclusion of publicly accessible open space as a part of the project. So putting together those 4 community benefits that draw off of what we want in Summer Vision, we're saying if you can do those and if you can do a neighborhood development plan, you can unlock the development potential in these areas. But without that large development plan approval and without providing those 4 benefits as a part of it, you can't unlock the full development capacity of those areas. The last thing I want to say about the economy that's important to us is we had a pretty significant discussion about retail and what we did and did not want to regulate under retail. Right now, a lot of changes between retails require special permit. Oftentimes, a change from like a retail to a small restaurant triggers a parking relief special permit or a parking relief variance. We're taking small parking variances through Davis Square all the time for projects that have no parking whatsoever. And we end up focusing on the parking. We don't end up focusing on the things that actually concern the neighbors. They often want to talk about, well, we're worried about this chain store, we're worried about the size of this business, and we're all focused on the parking special permit. So the parking special permit thing isn't a concern in these areas around transit. And what we did is we said there seem to be two major concerns that keep coming up when it comes to retail development in our community. The first is that there are people who have expressed a concern about large floor plates, about things 10,000 square feet or more, the size of the larger pharmacies up and beyond that, you know, and wanting to really have an understanding of that. So when you get into that size, we trigger the special permit and send that project to the zoning board or planning board for a review. The other thing was the differentiation between a chain store, a formula business as we call it, and a neighborhood business. So one of the things we've done is we've divided those two pieces off and said, if you're doing a formula retail or a formula restaurant space, that triggers a special permit and a review to make sure that that particular type of use can be consistent with the character of our neighborhood and fit into the quality of our neighborhood. Well, similar businesses that are independents can participate in getting a by right approval to go in and do their approval and review. This reaches the conclusion of my presentation. I want to add one brief comment before I forget the chance to do this for the entire group, which is that one of the key elements of this code in its predictability, its understandability, is that a lot of the building types become a site development review, which is basically a design review, site plan review type process. It's designed basically to deal with neighborhood impacts and to deal with design issues. So if someone builds a 5-story building in a 5-story district, we're talking about those issues. It is not designed to reduce unit count or to reduce building size. It is important to us to understand that if as a community we are saying that we believe that a certain area is more appropriate for, say, 3-story buildings than 4-story or 5-story buildings rather than 7-story, that those issues are addressed on the map now in the zoning process rather than doing these issues on a case-by-case basis later. And I just put that out there as an important role as you think about the map and we think about going forward. It's very important to me that we have the opportunity to make sure that we've checked in with our summer vision goals, checked in with our neighborhood planning goals, and gotten the map and the districts and stuff to work for us in a way that can make sense to encourage both predictability and still have a community process and discussion about the things that work as we go forward. I'm going to turn this back over to Brad, who is going to give you a brief outline of where and how you can provide feedback after today, and then also provide you with some information about how we are going to provide feedback the rest of this evening. Thanks.
Well, thanks, George. And thank you to all of you for your patience and again, for your participation. As we laughed earlier, zoning can feel like a really dry topic. And it's part of the reason it was so important for us to get great pizza from Peeny's tonight to make sure everybody was comfortable and ready to kind of learn together. We have been learning a lot through our neighborhood planning processes. And one of the things that we have really tried to communicate to our constituents is zoning is not the same as planning, right? In a community like this, where you've had a tradition of actually using zoning in place of planning, it's easy to mix those things up. It's a new era. The Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan, the Somerville by Design neighborhood plans are bringing the planning process to individual neighborhoods and stakeholder groups. We are offering 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. immersive charrette experiences so that folks who work second shift, folks who own a small business or have family needs that don't allow them to participate in a traditional night meeting can actually get involved. And so again, many of you have gotten plugged in and seen us occupy for several days at a time a vacant storefront in Winter Hill or in Davis Square on East Broadway. Most lately, we've been down in the historic post office in Union Square. So this is one of the really critical points we want to leave you all with. Zoning is a means to an end. The community plans that articulate our goals for preserving quality of life in our residential neighborhoods and steering the energy of the private market to be consistent with our values in our squares, on our main streets, and in our transitioning industrial areas. Those are the plans for the future. So you can find all sorts of resources on the web if you haven't done so already. A new website with this address was launched last week. We're really, really pleased with it. It's very interactive, it's very responsive, and we really do try to demystify what still can be a kind of an arcane and difficult series of terms associated with the zoning ordinance. You're going to be able to mark up your own copy and see what your own neighbors and friends are saying about it, and that's going to really help guide us as we work with the Board of Aldermen, the Planning Board, and all of our community partners to improve the draft that we've published already. If you are interested in seeing more of George's explanations of the background of zoning and why Somerville really requires a unique set of tools, get onto the Somerville by Design website, www.somervillebydesign.com, and you can see his TEDx talk that was filmed down at Brooklyn Boulders last year. It's about 10 minutes, and so it's kind of an abbreviated version. But again, it's really important for all of us to learn together. The staff learns from the folks that we interact with in the community every day, and we are pleased that so many of you are subject experts and, of course, experts in the things that are happening in your own neighborhoods. What happens next, administratively, legally, legislatively? The Planning Board and the Board of Aldermen will begin a formal hearing process this coming month. We are excited to continue the outreach efforts that we've been using for the last couple of years. We will come to community groups, no matter how large or small, groups of neighbors, and we will also make sure that there's an adequate diversity of geographic opportunities for folks to participate. Just this morning, George was delivering a lecture at the Somerville Chamber of Commerce. Tomorrow evening, we'll be speaking with the Young Somerville Advisory Group. We've delivered presentations and received comments in a formal setting from the boards of our Main Streets organization, from the Affordable Housing Organizing Committee, and a host of other community partners. The more voices that get raised and filtered into a process to help us guide our work, the better this ordinance will be in reflecting all of the diverse needs and opportunities of our community. So back to format for this evening. Again, many of you will have one or more specific issues that you really want to do a deep dive into. And to that end, we've got 5 or 6 members of our planning team who are subject experts in the code and in individual areas of public policy. We want folks to be able to interact with the actual nuts and bolts of these things, topic by topic. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to, and recognize them, and ask folks to kind of see where they're sitting. I've got Melissa Woods over at our mapping table, where you can, again, do your deep dives into, hey, what do you guys mean by that transit orientation map? What are these pedestrian streets? How does this future map interact and overlay with what we've all come to expect for the last, as George said, arguably 100 years of zoning in Somerville? We've got Dan Bartman, the primary author of our zoning ordinance, who knows the ordinance the best of all of us, who's been working tirelessly for 3 years to give Somerville the most modern and cutting-edge code possible. He's done this in 6 or 7 other communities around the country, and we're very, very lucky to have him. He will be walking through the nuts and bolts, the building types, the building components, and the home improvements, the decks, the dormers, the basements, the rear additions, all the things that make our residential neighborhoods function and that we intended to manage in a much more professional and clear way going forward. We've got Lori Massa on this side of the room. Lori has been part of the mayor's team for 7 years and has worked with the old code, the intermediate drafts, and the new code. She works with everybody from the smallest mom and pop homeowners and business owners to the largest developers in places like Assembly Square and North Point. And she will be advising folks and answering questions on the administration of the code, how it actually works day to day, month to month, project to project. Who have I missed? I will be staffing the economic development, the community benefits, the arts table, the maker economy in the back corner. And as George mentioned, he's going to be discussing affordable housing, open space, and a host of other community benefits that we expect this zoning ordinance to do a better job of delivering for our community. As we always say, Somerville is changing, and we have a choice to either stand idly by, and some of the things that happen will be consistent with our values and our vision, and some, frankly, will not. There are dozens and dozens of stories of communities, large and small, around the country and around the world, who have had opportunities like Somerville's and haven't necessarily guided change to be consistent with what our residents and customers and stakeholders want. Somerville is going to be different. And again, thank you for your time. Please, if you haven't had a piece of pizza, grab one and start to filter yourself to these tables. We'll be here for probably another hour to hour and 15 minutes with plenty of opportunity for one-on-one and small group conversations. Keep an eye on our website for future public meetings. Thank you kindly.
But the setback doesn't existing code, the setback required for the lot doesn't recognize the fact that the building's not sitting in the middle of the lot. So you're probably violating a side setback, right? Under the existing ordinance, that means you have to come in and get a special permit to alter your building just to put a dormer. Right? That happens. We deal with hundreds of cases just to build dormers. So what we did is we said, here's the dimensional requirements for a dormer, and regardless of whether or not you're violating a side setback, as long as the dormer you want to build on your roof meets these standards, you can do it by right.
So, but it doesn't like so if it's on the side of the building that's closest to the neighboring property, probably you wouldn't be able to build that dormer inside that setback, so you'd have to kind of push it on.
No, you can build it on both sides, and what the code does now is it says as long as the dormer is properly proportioned and properly built onto the roof, then it's an allowed attachment.
So you can put dormers on both sides.
Yeah, and one of the things that's different is that we have a lot of mutant dormers now, and so we went around and took pictures of all the dormers that we thought were more appropriately sized, and based the standards off of that. So there are places where people have built crazy things that go at different angles and whatnot. It's actually as if they built a whole other story on top of it. Right. Something like that can't happen when you don't have that's a result of having an FAR requirement. And
what is that
floor area ratio. And so that was invented in zoning to control the form and shape of a skyscraper. And then it was over time applied to smaller and smaller buildings. But what it does is it doesn't tell you, because it's generic, floor area is floor area, it doesn't care whether or not it's underneath a dormer or underneath a pitched roof or in the basement. So we have people that can't finish basements because they have dormers on them. You know what I mean? So really what we switched to was, instead of an FAR requirement, individual parts have individual metrics. And we used the analogy that we switched from Play-Doh to a Lego-based system. So you have building blocks that attach together and have certain rules instead of a mound of clay that you build.
And one of my other questions is about basements.
Yeah.
I heard something that there might be more permitted accessory use basements, whether that's in-laws or is it actually another unit? I mean,
yeah, we have right now in the use section is a secondary dwelling unit. Although most of the houses have 2 or 3 dwelling units, it's called secondary because it must be made available to rent by somebody that owns one of the other units in the building. So for them, it's a secondary unit, either in the basement or under a pitched roof. But it's another way of getting a third unit on a case-by-case basis. But really, the house type is meant to be a two-unit building. That's one of the reasons we actually see dormers blowing out roofs, is that really a third unit under a pitched roof is not enough space for a family. So we created our house building type is based off of having 2 units in a house and not 3. But that's one of the ways that you might end up getting a third, is if there's a case for making a basement unit in a finished basement. As long as there's an owner-occupant on one of the other floors that operates that as a rental.
How doesn't the fire department disallow?
So the fire department and building code have additional requirements. For instance, the window, to build a basement unit, you have to have window wells and certain size windows. And if you're close to a property line, you might have to have fire-rated windows. Things like that come into play, but that's additional on top of whatever the zoning allows.
I thought they didn't allow snow.
I don't think that's true. I lived in a house in a basement unit. But
I guess the easiest way to ask this question is to show you if this is my corner.
Yep.
This is one lot. That's another one. That's a third. And this house, or this lot, is mine.
Yep.
In talking.
But then that space would stay in that, so that somebody new could come along who's developing a new publishing company or graphic design studio or fine arts.
Right, you get that churning opportunity.
Right, so that, because that's one of the things that always happens. Artists come in, they go, ooh, there's a funky old building. I'm gonna move in there. And then everybody goes, oh wow, there art's over here, it's a funky old building. And then, like Brick Bottom, they get priced out. So that's really great to hear. I had one question about the gallery, or carriage house part.
Yes.
I'd like to suggest that get pushed a little bit so that if somebody, say I live in a 2-story house on Josephine.
Josephine, great street.
Okay. Now, if I was to decide that I wanted to support the creative economy, and could I, or how is it possible to make the first floor 1-bedroom apartment that I've got a live workspace for an IT person, a graphic designer, it wouldn't be a rock band that needed a rehearsal space, but creative economies that I venture to guess they're there already. People are doing it. Already. But how can that part of the ordinance be pushed to include units within buildings, or two or three family houses, or an in-law apartment, that kind of thing, so that there's yet another way, another part of the city, and the way the city can nurture and support the artistic part of the city that is one of the reasons everybody wants to move here now. Okay,
great suggestion. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. We'll make sure that we add that to our list of FAQs.
Because I think it would be something that I know there are people out there.
My sense is that one of the sticking points, one of the challenges for us will continue to be evaluating the impacts of giving commercial enterprise versus another, right? And so we all know the heating and plumbing contractors who literally operate on their home and park a van in the driveway, right? We've got one in my neighborhood for sure.
Right.
Is that an impact on my quality of life? No. But if somebody's got a limousine operation and 3 or 4 minivans that they're driving folks to Logan Airport every day, completely different business model, right?
Right. Or if somebody is a graphic designer and they have 3, 4 clients coming to visit, and they can just give them one of their parking permits.
Right.
During the week, you're at the same time you're providing good, having people in the creative economy be able to perform their business at the same place that they work, and it makes a lot of sense, I think.
You should check the allowable use table in residential, for the residential buildings, because it's my understanding that even in a residential area, office type uses are allowable accessory uses within residential units.
If they're accessory and you live in that unit.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, right.
So like a graphic designer can live anywhere in the city and run an office out of their house.
Okay. I, as a homeowner, I live on the 2nd floor.
Even a renter.
Even a renter.
Yeah.
That's
as long check the use table, because as long as it's one of the acceptable accessory uses, and they're all like designer, fine artists.
The really low impact types of operations.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I would think that there would be some kinds of artistic endeavors if it was in caustics and painting, which have fumes
an effect on the neighbor. I mean,
and will have an effect on the neighbor. That has to be looked at more carefully. But so I'm really glad to hear that. Very glad to hear that.
The other thing I want to come back to, because you can look at these issues from the core residential neighborhood standpoint, but you can also look at it as the Assembly Square, the large development districts, and this idea of requiring builders who can operate at a scale like Assembly Square to set aside 5% of their ground floor space for creative economy businesses is something that we're really, really excited about. We think it's a best practice. We think folks around the country will be watching.
Is my right that that's taken the Arts Overlay District and basically said, whole city,
yeah.
Which
$10 square foot, $15 square foot, but not the $25, $30 square foot rents that the open market might command. So making sure that those price points continue to be a part of the mix in Somerville is just an absolutely critical policy goal for us. So we're going to deal with that in a couple of ways. One is by preserving the spaces that are already here. And so when people think about all the great activities happening down along Somerville Avenue, the Artisans Asylum, Greentown Labs, Brooklyn Boulders, all the kind of startup office spaces and fabrication and art spaces down there, I think that kind of is what gets conjured in their minds. But there are distinctions and differentiations between them, right? If you're a hobbyist who's a member at the asylum, that is very different than a user and a member at Greentown Labs who's out pursuing venture capital funding. Both of those users might want the same open floor plans, the same heavy walls, the same access to delivery trucks or loading, right? So we need to make sure that Somerville continues to provide those $8 or $10 square foot rents, and also something that's a little bit more kind of competitive in the marketplace. And we're finding that owners who have large properties, like the folks down on Somerville Avenue, have the ability to do both, right? They, for example, get rents that are much higher. Believe it or not, they're self-storage units along the street. And the revenues from that side of their land holdings essentially helps them absorb the fact that they're not necessarily getting top dollar for the asylum, right? And we think that in lots and lots of different warehouse and kind of traditional light industrial buildings around Somerville, you have that ability. The new zoning is creating what's called this fabrication district, and we haven't found anybody around the country who's done exactly this yet. Everybody always talks about like light industry and modern industry, clean industry. We're calling it fabrication, and we're saying very, very clearly, if you own a building that is uniquely suited to those needs and to those price points, as a community member, we want to work with you to preserve it. We will work with you also to make sure that we are being realistic about the market. And so zoning has limitations. The city has financial assistance programs that we use to support mom and pop shop owners, restaurateurs. We don't necessarily extend some of those programs and assistance to working artists or to what we call enlightened landlords who want to rent their space for sub-market leases. There's a great example down the block from City Hall in Gilman Square, a studio building I'm sure many of you know called Mad Oyster, where we've sat with the landlords a couple of times, and they are very, very enlightened. They rent sub-market to a group of about a dozen diverse artists and makers, but they say to us every day, guys, one thing that the city could help us with is tax rebates and probably energy cost assistance, right? So the city has programs that residents can tap into. I'm a Somerville homeowner, and I'm able to write down my taxes as a resident occupant, right? The city has energy efficiency programs that are targeted at residents to help, bring old water heaters up to, kind of modern technology. Why don't we do the same things for enlightened owners of fabrication spaces? So as we talk about the zoning reform effort, we're also really trying to emphasize to folks that this is not the be-all, end-all. And without, I think, targeted economic assistance programs for the sectors of the economy that really could use a leg up to compete, we won't necessarily achieve all of our goals. So the mayor has talked about really expanding the resources available to support individual artists and makers, and again, the enlightened landlords who want to rent, but also have their own finances to watch out for.
And people come back after the fact and they're like, well, I know I told you I was going to do a window with this detail and I did it with that detail instead. And, sometimes, we have some pretty heated discussions about those particular issues. Inevitably, if there is a change, we make them do at least a minor change amendment. It's a staff approval level. That process is the same here, but that process was designed to be done before you do the change, not afterwards. And I think we have, over the last couple of years, spent a significant amount of time educating at least the regulars amongst the development community here about what our expectations are. And when newcomers come in and build things here, I really sit them down and try to explain to them that we're not building in Dover or Reading. When your houses are 3 feet apart from each other, if you tell your neighbor you're going to save that tree and you're going to do a black window and you're going to do a hardy plank sided building with a 3-foot dormer, if you come back with a 4-foot dormer, a vinyl sided building, a white window, and the tree's gone, you're going to have a set of problems. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Zoning code detail specific financing or at least even recommend something like TIF for these areas you have defined like Interval, possibly Union Square, with the financing being targeted towards public benefits, which could include affordable housing or other.
they're all good ideas. They're not natural to write into the rules of a code. I would expect that when someone comes into an Interbelt or Brick Bottom district and does a neighborhood development plan, or a large development plan, which triggers the large-scale plan, at that point we would look at the whole set of tools that are available to us to address how to fit the total set of packages together. And the one thing I've said in that area is that when you do those plans, we're going to require the commercial development, we're going to require the affordable housing, we're going to require the publicly accessible open space, and we're going to require the 5% arts and creative economy use. I expect a lot of those entities, along with us, will be looking at all of the creative financing solutions to deal with everything from increasing community benefits beyond the basic requirements to addressing infrastructure needs. And one of the most significant challenges we have is we may find we need most of the TIF money to cover the cost of doing things like shore separation, which I know is not that exciting and interesting, but is necessary to make any new housing work in a place like that. But all of that stuff becomes a part of the conversation as we build the neighborhood development plan process for each project. And the idea is if you have 2 or more acres of land, either as one owner or as a group of owners working together, if you come in and propose that, and you can look at the whole thing and figure out holistically how to address that.
I have another question, actually. This is totally different, but so just thinking about like changes in people's incomes, are there any provisions for like if someone's income qualifies and moves into an inclusionary unit and then they lose their income or their income goes down, like hopefully that people would still be able to stay in the unit or the people don't get evicted if their income changes. Is there anything in the code that does that, or is that separate, something that you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, it's not specifically addressed the way the code is set up, but I know it's a very good question for our housing division staff, because I know they have dealt with how to address that particular situation. Usually their goal at that point is to look at a funding source to address the additional level of subsidy between the what the expected payment is to a landlord versus what the actual availability to pay is of that individual. So how they deal with that specifically, I don't know, but I mean our strategy is to select someone through the lottery program, qualify them for an affordable unit, move them into that affordable unit, and keep them there as long as they want to be there. Make sure that they can, because the idea really is to stabilize them in the community. And one of the things that is key here is, unlike a lot of the state and federal requirements, because this is created as a local requirement, we can put a preference for people who live or work in Somerville into the code as our expectation that they get first lottery preference. And it's very rare that we get beyond that pool of people with the interest in the affordable units. So it's usually folks who already have a Somerville connection that we're trying to stabilize in the community through the affordable inclusion units that we have here.
And on that, actually,
yeah, you could. I don't mind.
It's a good topic of conversation. As they fix rules and regs, and we have existing rules and regs, what it says is specific details like that they can spell out in their rules. And then basically, I think the process is that the planning board actually gets to review and confirm the rules that the division sets up. So there's still a public process where those rules are blessed to say this is a reasonable set of rules for affordable housing. And stuff like that, sort of the nuts and bolts of how to do it can be settled through that process.
About special permits.
Yes.
It seems like the role of special permits in the new zoning ordinance is very different from what it was because of all the stuff that you described in your presentation.
Yep.
So I just wanted, though, to clarify for myself completely, is there any more role that special permits play as far as affordable housing regulations and everything? Because right now, as it is, you have to go. The affordable housing is triggered by the special permit process, right?
Yes.
But that's no longer the case here?
That's correct. So one of the things we realized is if we wanted to move to the predictability of by right or by right design review type units and still keep our affordable housing regulations, we needed a trigger to work without the special permits. And this is a question that I brought to a whole bunch of the greatest legal minds of Massachusetts zoning and said, assure me that this is okay. And they unanimously told me it is okay to say that the rule with inclusionary is you have to be able to allow people, it has to essentially be optional. And the way it's optional is that, you know, it actually kind of comes back to the thing we talked about. We can look at kind of where it works. You can always choose to do something other than the 6 units of housing. You can choose to do a commercial building. You can choose to do a 3-family. You can choose to do, within every district that it triggers, there's something you can choose to do that doesn't trigger. But if you select, it says this section is applicable to all residential developments that choose to build more than 6 units. When you choose to make that decision, you are required under this ordinance to provide these, regardless of whether it is a design review, a by right, a special permit, a variance, or whatever it may trigger. That immediately, the mere selection of doing more than 6 units is what triggers the affordability. And that was a very important thing for us to be able to do. In order to achieve our overall housing goals, I didn't want to make every housing development in Somerville a special permit that then suddenly became possible, that it became much more kind of speculative as to whether or not you could actually get them to be done.
Between the submittal of a new ordinance, it's based off of unknowing. You know, people don't know whether or not the new ordinance will pass or not. So when the regulations are so drastically different, your project might not be appropriate under the old ordinance, so you don't go forward because it's too much. There's too much money and risk involved with getting an approval under the new one, only to then have it not approved. Right. So, but for things like that, we might be able to work with the boards because we give out special permits for dormers that meet these conditions anyway. And under the new ordinance, it's an administrative process as long as you meet those conditions. So that's the difference. It has a lot to do with the project size and complexity.
And your guess on getting happening?
We need 8 votes of the Board of Aldermen. I'm not sure. You have to talk to George about that. He's better at the politics. But I think the city needs a regulatory update, and everybody kind of recognizes that. And I think the board's interested in working together with everybody to get an ordinance that's better.
No, but there should have been a little tiny announcement that said it wouldn't be a bad thing if you wrote to your alderman and said, we think this is a good idea.
What we're hoping to do is collect emails on our zoning email list, and then at some point we're going to trigger people to help come support if you're in support, or actually come provide your comment regardless of which side you're on. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Kind of work with the owner to say, hey, a portion of this ground floor may be suitable for one of those, cash flow oriented tenants, and then upper floor users like your own business, Richard, are actually well suited to continue to operate there because they've got X, Y, and Z attributes and benefits.
And it could even benefit the piano maker and provide them with bring more money into the area. That's right. Because they're more accessible, they're more. You don't have to necessarily get rid of them to make it work.
And so these are the exact kind of questions that we're at this stage of the process that we need more constituent feedback on. The folks who are renting space in these buildings, the folks who own these buildings, they're calling us up, they're sending us emails, they're attending meetings like this one tonight, and we take this information and we use it to kind of surgically improve the proposal that's on the table right now, so that when the formal board process starts a week or 2 from now, we've got our best thinking embedded. That doesn't mean it's the end of the road, right? We still need folks to come out and advocate at the planning board, at the Board of Aldermen, at the neighborhood-based meetings that we'll continue to do, because this thing will not be perfect until it's perfect, right?
I have a couple of related questions, actually. So, it's one thing to protect a particular use, but like if a landlord wants to take down a building because they think they can do more, something more lucrative, it destroys what's there that you're trying to protect by the zoning and the uses. And so I'm wondering how the zoning code would deal with that. I'm also wondering about whether properties are deed restricted, so that, for example, if you do create, let's say, a carriage house for arts uses, and then somebody purchases it and they already have now this building which was originally for a carriage purpose, but now they want to turn it into something else. It doesn't require the scale of modification that might trigger a review by the planning board, but it still might change the intended use. And I'm just wondering, so how does the zoning deal with change like that, either demolition or repurposing in a way that wasn't really what was intended?
Great questions, and I'll answer them in a couple of ways, and my answer will not be comprehensive. But at the bare minimum, loopholes in the existing ordinance that have been exploited to demolish historic homes will be closed. Because our residents tell us that they love that fabric of historic pitched roof, primarily pitched roof and triple-decker flat roof homes in most of our blocks, right? There are tremendous incentives and loopholes buried in the old ordinance that folks in the development community have, figured out how to use to put apartment buildings, 8, 10, 12 unit apartment buildings, as George mentioned, in the middle of otherwise 2 and 3 family residential blocks. So those loopholes will be closed. And I think on the commercial side, there's a couple of pieces to the puzzle. One is a clear statement of intent that our old buildings contribute to our character and are economically viable for different groups of users and people, that we shouldn't just have a swap out with the old and with the new approach in our neighborhood squares and in our transitioning industrial areas. Secondly, we talked a moment ago about all the non-zoning tools and policy kind of programs that need to complement this work. Deed restrictions, community land trusts, nonprofit ownership of spaces that are particularly well suited to the arts economy, to the maker movement, I think is something that is really important to our long-term success.
Like the Powder House School.
For example, right? And you can think of 100 other kind of shared equity models that folks have either used in other cities around the country or around the world. Brick Bottom Artist Loft is one. Of course, Mud Flat's another one, exactly. Honestly, this building that we're standing in right now is in some ways meeting that need. It's a business incubator of sorts. I was just talking with a gentleman who's got a music studio startup, and works here as a tech, and he said, hey, come downstairs, we've got a recording studio. If you're a musician, you can record music here in a high quality professional setting. That's so cool. Scout Somerville just relocated their offices here, right? And so here we have an owner of a historic building that perhaps has used existing policies and assistance programs to bring this building up to code and make it appropriate for use in the creative economy. We have, as some of you, Fred, for example, know better than I do, a really strong tradition of affordable housing advocacy and great nonprofit ownership of affordable units, whether it's the Somerville Housing Authority, the Community Corporation, the VNA, Volunteers for America. Are there equivalents in the commercial and the creative economy world? I don't think so. I don't think that we have those yet, but some cities around the region and around the country have figured out whether repurposing and kind of evolution of the mission of an existing community development corporation or establishment of a new nonprofit that has the ability to buy and hold land, to manage property as a landlord, to curate the mix of community-oriented entrepreneurs. I think that's something that we've heard from Somerville residents would be an important part of our strategy going forward.
I think that would be a great way. Yeah. Right. There are no really keep the soil. But a lot of uses allow me to review.
Good idea. The city of Worcester has what's called an Economic Development Corporation that is enabled under federal and state statute that qualifies for certain tax treatment, liability protections to oil land and lease land, and that's something that we've been exploring a little bit in our office with our economic development team. The Main Streets programs, in some ways, are already doing this in places like Union Square, right? Think about Kitchen Incubator. The Kitchen Incubator down on Somerville Avenue near the Target site, where an old automobile garage was essentially identified by an enlightened entrepreneur and landlord, and now is spinning off companies, the most celebrated of which, of course, is Union Square Donuts. They started in Kitchen Inc., a shared low-cost commercial incubator.
So if you have a business like that with a storefront, what's the stop, for example, in AT&T from sort of deciding, okay, well, we'll rent space now there. That's a great location, and I get it. At the beginning, you can kind of use the zoning to say, well, if you're going to redesign the space, rebuild the space, then we're going to have some leverage around who comes in. But when you re-tenant existing offices, is there a way of controlling who comes in so that?
Yes
to
and no.
make sure
Yes
that
and
it
no.
stays for creative use.
Yeah. I mean,
Part
we're
of it
doing
has
that.
to do with the special permit framework that we've used, in some cases successfully, in some cases unsuccessfully, for the last 40 or 50 years, versus what they call by right conditions. And so George described a framework where the things that our community says are important that we want should be available without the uncertainties and the long process and red tape of discretionary special permits. The things that we're a little bit more concerned about from either an impact standpoint or an actual community character standpoint can be retained under the special permit category, whether you're talking about certain types of residential, certain types of commercial space. Here's a great example. In Davis Square, about a year and a half ago, we brought the Somerville by Design neighborhood planning process to a vacant storefront down on Cutter Square next to the Rosebud. It's in the new building at 377 Summer that is now the ground floor home of the
credit union.
Was it Lynn Credit Union? And we were discouraged in some ways because the landlord had told us he really viewed that as an opportunity to bring some of the vitality and foot traffic down to that square. We had used a temporary demonstration project to reclaim the 10-space public parking lot out front of that and turn it into a public plaza. And we're moving forward with a project to actually turn that into a permanent pedestrian plaza. Banks are killers of street life. ATM kiosks are killers of street life. And that Cutter Square is already framed by Citizens Bank, by the Winterville Bank, but relatively Winterville building. And now there's a credit union in that space. We didn't have the regulatory tools in place to actually say that
tag it to other programs. So, we've looked at the idea that if you reach 25%, you can do certain tax credit programs. If you reach 25% of the units is affordable housing. So if you're already at 28 and taking that jump actually makes it worth doing that for development. You don't need to do that now, but that's one of the we're looking more specifically at the state's 40R program, which made sense on top of this as a strategy, particularly in some places. How are you, Fred? I know we've talked about this a bit, but that trigger, that may overlay over this very well. The 40R was designed very well to do 20% housing at certain percentages of area median income. It's like built based upon these numbers. So you want to continue to build it based upon these numbers. One of the interesting questions is it may make it more difficult to do our third tier under those circumstances. So we've got to look at how those pieces fit together. The difference between the Somerville and the area income, I think we can quantify what that is, and you could scale the numbers to see what the actual impacts are, and at least have the conversation about, if 50% of area median is actually a different percentage of Somerville median, you can figure out what that number is and you can at least know it, but using the area median and the zoning is easier for us to talk the same language as the others who have been sort of working on affordable housing programs.
Is there a way, if it leads to deeper affordability, where that's where like the creative financing comes to play? Because if it's a set definition in the zoning code, but is it leading to real affordability for people?
Well, I do want to stress that one of the things it says in here is you can always provide affordability to a lower income category and a deeper affordability than the code requires. So, if we're saying that you have to be in a target income tier at 40, 70, and 100, and someone comes in the project and they have the ability to provide a building full of people at 50s and 30s, as far as you're concerned, you've met our requirement. I mean, you're at people of lower income than our requirement is, but that's acceptable to meet that standard. And I know that word is in here somewhere. I don't remember where, but I remember right. Well, what I'm saying is, I guess if a lower income, I mean,
type doesn't match the building type that is permitted in there, you're allowed to do anything to that building to become more like one of the permitted building types, because the concept is that district is to produce those building types.
Isn't that sort of directly opposed when those permitted building types are not ones that are part of a historic district. A lot of
Well, I mean, maybe it's in the wrong zoning district, right?
Well, yeah, you know the most.
Yeah, totally. I know exactly. Yeah, I know all the
So
properties.
what's
so.
right district?
Well, I mean, you have to ask.
No,
I think the historic district should inform a decision like that. But one of the things that's happening is that we weren't interested in making those calls that were a decision that was made at some previous time about putting that in the business district. Maybe it's more appropriate for that to be in a neighborhood residence district, because it's also been preserved through a historic district. But one of the things that there are only 200 properties or something small like that across the entire city that had a problem where we had to change the district because it didn't follow the formula. The formula was, if it's an RA, it goes to neighborhood residence. If it's RB, it goes to neighborhood, But some of the districts we completely broke because there wasn't something that it converts into. So then we had to make a decision, and so we made a rule, and we tried to get all of the properties that were to follow that rule, but occasionally you hit something that didn't work out.